Folks, welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show. And we are joined today by a legendary drummer and a great human being and a fellow wine drinker, live from the Biale Vineyards, Errico. Welcome back to the Jake Feinberg Show, man.
Jake, I must say, it's good to be here.
Can you just talk about, Buddy Rich might have been the outlier insofar as how dynamic he played the drums. But even though, when you were growing up, can you just talk about the drummers who just used the instrument as an accompanist kind of instrument, and how that influenced your playing, even though you took it to another level?
Well, Buddy Rich was definitely not playing just an accompaniment instrument. He was, it was all built around his drumming as being the very part of the performance. But we were speaking about earlier that back in that time period, 50s, early 60s, drums were just, it was kind of like, it just was in the background, just doing rhythm. It wasn't something you noticed. If it wasn't there, it wasn't there, but the fact that it was there, it was just supporting the rhythm. It was just a rhythm instrument.
So what I was trying to get at is, even though I know Buddy was one of your idols, who were some of the cats that just did what you described that you can talk about that influenced you, whether you saw him live? Was Morello like that?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I used to practice. I had a little 45 RPM record changer, and I used to come home from school and had the drums set up downstairs in this little party room, for lack of a better term, and I used to practice the records. And so one of them, believe it or not, was Take 5.
Right. That's great.
Which is in 5. Joe Morello and
Senator Eugene Wright on bass, maybe.
Yeah, but then I used to listen to we'd put on some James Brown. I'd put on some Ray Charles, Aretha Franklin. Put on some Wilson Pickett. I put a bunch of different stuff. Some Mongo. I love Latin music. And so I used to listen to a lot of different stuff. But I think the point of the...
Well, no, what we were getting at is the idea that you said if the rhythm wasn't there, you'd notice it. But it wasn't at the fore.
Yeah, drums weren't mixed in a record as in the forefront. They were in the background, literally. And that kind of changed. I'd have to say that probably Sly, being the producer, I have to credit him for making the drums, the rhythm in the drums, the instrument in the forefront, or right equal in a mix of a record, where it was part of right there with the vocals, with the horns, and it's in your face. And then of course, getting into the late '60s, early '70s,
right?
In the rock world, Zeppelin. I don't have to tell you where the drums are mixing those records.
We're talking.
Everything was on top of that.
So great to hang with Errico. Can you just tell the story to the audience about the cat in Daly City that you went to school with, the other drummer who introduced you to Carlos, and the pizza gigs you used to play on?
Oh.
How did you meet Carlos? Who was that cat that introduced you guys?
His name was Danny Harrow. We went to school together, and he lived in the Mission District. His family owned, they made tortillas. And he introduced me to Carlos, because they lived in the same neighborhood. But for some reason, Danny went to school where I was, which was like a different district. And I never really knew the reason why was he going to school there. But we were buddies, and he introduced me to Carlos, and we actually had a couple gigs. We used to play at this pizza parlor in San Francisco. Just a handful of gigs, and so that's where we first met. Then we both, went on to start our individual bands or be in them. It was his was originally the Santana Blues Band.
Carabella was in that. They didn't have
Yeah.
any bridges to tunes. They didn't. I mean, well, I guess more to the like. You were playing duo gigs or trio gigs sometimes in that pizza joint. What did that look
It
like?
would have been trio.
Bass,
Yeah.
bass,
Bass
drums.
guitar, yeah. Yeah.
I mean, when you got on the trap set, even in the pizza joints, you were responsible for bringing the drums to the forefront in music.
Well, with the trio, you know, it kind of.
I'm talking more like slide. I'm saying like, at that time was that already what was your incentive? What did you want to say on the drums?
Oh, there was nothing intellectually thought about. It was just like just go play, have a gig, and go jam.
It was a gig though.
Yeah, that's all. You know, there was nothing sophisticated about it or any planned anything. It was just literally we'd go set up and jam, just play. You know, which was a big part of the spirit of the San Francisco music explosion. With that attitude, you know, created, you know, the Grateful Deads and the Quicksilvers and the blues tinged bands and the rock tinged bands that, you know, they just wanted to play it. And so it was a very creative atmosphere, which all that great music came out of, you know, that thought.
I want you to talk to people around the world. I've just learned myself in the last few years, being able to play with a couple of surrogate uncles on drums, that I might not be a professional drummer, but I can keep tempo.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm not schooled. And you were playing beer joints when you were 15, but your folks didn't want you to have a trap set in the house. I don't think you went to music school.
No.
Can you just talk to people innately about the internal rhythm and how everybody actually does have that inside of them, and how then eventually to take it to another level without having to go through the academy?
Well, you know, as far as just, you know, in human being terms, rhythm is part of our DNA. It's part of I believe it's the first language. The communication in tribes before languages, I'm talking, we're going way back now, were, you know, smoke signals, and more so they were beating on logs and handmade drums and stuff, and those patterns and those rhythms and the intensity of them described war or peace or celebration and those types of things. It was first language, you know. So I think it's part of our DNA. Rhythms, it's a natural thing.
And it's a stronger language than the voice.
Well,
because what you're talking about is trust. I mean, when someone bangs on a spiritual or saying there's a funeral, there's an emergency, and you hear.
Well, you put it this way: a voice, unless it's a common language, may have be subject to interpretation. A rhythm, there is no language. It's the same anywhere.
That's
it's
universal.
To Africa, to Australia, to Europe, to whatever, and that rhythm's going to do the same thing to an individual. So there's no language. So in that sense, it is more powerful, I believe.
Did you? The other thing is, I wanted to clear this up. Carabello used to take the 47 bus to the aquatic park and watch the Beatniks play drums.
Yeah.
Were you hip to that scene?
Yeah.
To talk about that, I mean, you had Beatniks playing drums.
Yeah.
I mean, can you talk about your involvement with that? And did you meet Carabello down there?
I didn't meet him there. I knew him around the same time, but I didn't meet him there. But I went to some of those things. They used to do it down in Aquatic Park. They used to do it at the San Francisco beach. You know, like on a nice day, there would be 10, anywhere from 5 to maybe 15 guys would assemble and just start jamming. Someone would start a rhythm, they join in, and these things would go on for an hour, 2 hours. You know, and they'd get deep, and a crowd would develop around them, and it was a cool thing. I don't see it anymore, but I remember those.
Right. I mean, to me, going back to this universal language of rhythm, I think there was a camaraderie. I mean, clearly there was camaraderie being built at that time. You know, through the drum. I mean, yeah. Carabello was called to that. Mm-hmm. And then his dad would be like, "What the hell? Why did it take you so long in the bathroom?" He's like, "No, I was checking out the beats, playing drums."
Right.
And those rhythms, it just kept. And this is what you talk about the San Francisco music scene. the camaraderie. But did it all come from Bill Graham?
What?
Did it come from the business mindset of being, hey, everybody's gonna we're gonna all dig it together, and we're gonna make it all universal? Or I mean, where did that or did it come from the musicians?
I think it was something that developed and morphed along the way. The more important thing is that San Francisco seemed to have to be a place where that spirit could live and develop and grow. And so people like, Bill Graham came there, and he was able to. I mean, he didn't come there knowing what his end game was.
Sure.
He came there just loving music and knowing the importance of community and creating that and putting the two together. And I mean, look what he created. He created the platform for bringing indigenous musics together, and blues and rock and jazz, and putting them together for an audience that turned them on to stuff they may not have been subject to,
right,
to listen to dig, to get into. Therefore, it uplifted a lot of those artists, and it uplifted the people that were enjoying the music too, and really created a powerful music scene that still today, everything that exists is born from that. I really believe.
Can you unpack that a little bit more? That's a powerful statement.
Well, in other words, all the diversity today comes from the spirit of what was created back then in the late '60s, bringing these elements together. That wasn't happening back then. There was segregation.
It was overt.
Yeah.
So therefore,
in music, I mean, it was jazz. There was rock and roll. There was Latin. There was gospel. And they were very separated, and they didn't intertwine and mingle.
Interesting.
I think.
This is fascinating.
I can't say that I know anywhere that that mingling
right.
existed anywhere in the world, and it started in San Francisco during that period. And I have to credit Bill Graham for doing it.
Right, because you said that really the recording industry was everything that was really happening was going on in Los Angeles or New York.
Yeah.
And then that nest built in San Francisco. Were there any people you wanted to tip your cap to in the 50s or in the early 60s that were making San Francisco hip when everyone just saw it as a really cool city to go to, and they didn't see it?
There was no music business in San Francisco.
But I mean, there was no I'm just curious about where.
And truthfully, there wasn't even after that. The business that existed in San Francisco, I think, and was controlled by the individual groups that made it during that period. They chose to live in the Bay Area, and they had their own organizations. It wasn't like the record companies. I mean, they tried coming up here, setting up satellite offices,
right?
And it never really meant anything. Maybe they would book some time for you or whatever, but they don't. It was the groups that created the music business.
Wow.
Only because they ran their businesses here, and in that sense, it wasn't like the music business that existed in New York, or Los Angeles, that produced and developed, and the whole other end of the business, the record companies.
I couldn't think of asking any better person, actually. I mean, did you have, looking back on Los Angeles, not that it's a fantastic city, but musically, was it too slick? I mean, what was your experience like there?
No, I lived down there for a while. I mean, I was just doing my thing. I was doing a lot of producing, and I always say people.
Were you given the assignments, or did you find them?
Well, it wasn't like I was down there like looking for action, sign them and then go produce them and stuff. I hooked up with a company down there, and ended up producing 12, 15 records. So it was kind of like
LAX.
Yeah,
LAX.
Oh
yeah. Wow! You want to talk about that?
Well, it started out with my relationship with Lee Oscar, who was the harmonica player in the group War, and Excuse me.
Yeah, that's all right.
It's a deal. And
It's going
anyway,
down.
so I was working on this too, and Lee came over the house, to meet. Jerry Goldstein had hooked us up. Steve Gold.
Gold.
Yeah.
Gold and Errico came to Lee Oscar's estate.
Yeah. And he came over, and I was working on this too, and he goes, and I was playing it back when he walked into the room, and he goes, "Hey, that sounds great. Could I play on that? Could I play something on that?" I said, "Sure." So he whips out his harmonica, and I put a mic up, and that was a song that was the first single off the first record that I produced for Lee. It was called Lee Oscar, and the song was called BLT. And so that's how.
Is that the one on the cover with him and the girl swinging across space, or was it the other one with him
the cicada and the stars?
Wild pick, yeah, great.
Yeah,
unbelievable
it
album.
was his wife then.
You played traps on that album too.
Well, I played on the whole thing
yeah.
and co-wrote and produced it. And I ended up doing 3 records for Lee. And
what was the gig with the offshoot from Clinton's group? Can you talk about that? The Funkadelic?
that was the Funkadelic. That was the there was George and Fuzzy Grady and I can't think of his name. There were 3 guys that were with George that were the Funkadelic and Parliament and all that. And they came to a point where that they separated, and the 3 guys left George, and Jerry signed him to LAX and asked me to produce the record. So and that was called Connections, Disconnections.
1980 or so.
Yeah, in the early 80s, late 70s, early 80s.
Did you? I guess more to the point, that experience as a producer down there. Can you just talk about? You did tell that story in our last Facebook Live interview about this cat from Colombia in the '80s was like, "Yeah, I'm going to come along and put a disco beat on Dance to the Music. We're going to take Graham and Errico." You didn't felt all of a sudden you were replaceable.
Well,
and in the '80s in LA at that time. Well, whatever. Riff on that. I mean,
well, I don't think one doesn't necessarily have to do with the other. That happened. Yeah, I think when the disco era came to be, and I mean, it didn't. I didn't feel threatened by it any way. It was just some how would you say it? It was a failed thought from some brainy producer
That's what you
at
said.
Columbia that decided to take Dance to the Music, of all things, and put a disco beat to it, meaning he took Larry Graham and Greg Errico off the tracks and put I forgot if it was a drum machine or something. It's kind of like taking, the meat out of the steak.
You're eating the bone.
It's like it proved to never see the light of day. So I guess,
Did you make it always? What was your experience once Sly introduced the? Did you always make an effort to put human rhythm in music, or did you use drum machines in LA?
No, when Sly creatively took a drum machine and made it to almost a household word. Excuse me.
Drink some wine.
I got something coughing through it. Yeah. Hang on a second.
Yeah. Joined here by Greg Errico at the Biale Vineyards. Sly creatively put the drum machine in there.
That's when I left the group. So he was under a lot of pressure to keep producing records. And so he took the drum machine while he was writing, and he would, use that as his rhythm template so he could continue to write. And it ended up being something that he started hearing things. So, and it was a very, when I say drum machine, it's not like the drum machines of today that are very sophisticated.
What was it like? I really want to know what it was like.
It was a little rhythm. It was I think it was called Rhythm King. They were something that existed in the early 70s, that when you walked into a Holiday Inn lounge, piano lounge, some guys are doing some really like corny. And he had a little drum machine. He'd play piano to and sing to it, and it was like a little cha-cha.
Wow. Okay, I did see one of those.
Very unsophisticated. Nothing like drum machines of today. So he was using it just for clock, just for time, so he could write. And then he started. Well, I wasn't there, so but I'm assuming he started. He was messing with it, and so he started hearing something. Probably, I would imagine, in the back of his mind, where maybe he could do something creative with this. So, what happened is he would, instead of you press the button and it starts on one, click 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever the cha-cha beat was, really kind of like, right? But so he took and he started the 1 like on 2, or in between the 2 and the 3 count. So by editing it, so you play the measure, and then but you start in the middle of the measure or somewhere in the middle of the half of a beat. That would be the 1. So it turned this whole beat inside out and upside down, and so it immediately caught your ear, and it was funky. It was like, it's cool. It was like, oh, what is that? Oh, this is cool, And you just loop it, and you make as many measures as you want with it, and that's what he did. And so it ended up being a very creative thing, and part of the sound of this new era of his writing. Family Affair, and all that stuff.
It was after There's a Riot Going On, or that was the album that it was.
It started.
Yeah.
No, I think you used some of it even in Riot, if I remember correctly.
Right.
I may not be remembering correctly.
Can you just show the audience the album that I gave you, and then talk about this cat, Chipito? I mean, he was responsible for the Latin rock sound. Greg Errico played traps on that.
Well, Chipito was the original timbale player in the original band of Santana, and this was his solo album. So we had been jamming a lot in this club down in San Francisco off of Broadway Street.
Andres.
And Andres. And so when he had the opportunity to do an offshoot record from Santana, his solo record, I did it with him. But actually, there's several drummers on this. There's even, I think the single, which was called, the name of it here, Morning Star. There's actually 2, I think me and Tony Smith were playing drums, and Tony sang. Yeah, so a whole bunch of people that were, that during that point in time, San Francisco was really.
I mean, you got an education in the clave at Andres, right? I mean, you were playing Latin.
Yeah.
Were you playing, like, with Carlos and the Pizza Drum? Was that Latin music, or was it just you were playing rock?
No, we were just.
San Francisco sound? What was that?
We played, the tequila. I remember we did that. I don't remember. Maybe
so the pop tunes,
some blues. Some. I don't remember what. I mean, you're talking
64,
50-something years ago.
Dig. I understand. But as far as what did you learn from Pantoa, from Chipito, from Victor from all those cats about the Latin?
It was really kind of a Latin rock kind of thing we had going on down there, and jazz, all mixed together. A bunch of us. There was a lot of guys from different genres that came in. We used to jam together, and I picked up a lot. I mean, it was some of the greats. Victor Pantoa, Luis Gasca used to play trumpet. There was a lot.
Hadley Callan, we talked about before.
Hadley, yeah.
But I guess
there was another drummer. I'm trying to think. I can't remember his name. And these guys were like from Cuba and different places, Puerto Rico, and they brought some serious stuff to the table. So I learned some of the fundamentals of that. My feeling, and I still feel, Latin music like salsa and funk kind of goes together. It's like bringing a new spice to something. It really goes together. And
salsa and funk.
I never talked. I think I might be the only one that really has that feeling about that, a viewpoint.
I know a cat, great drummer Ronnie Beck, who played with John Lee Hooker. He just went on a cruise,
Yeah.
a Latin cruise,
Yeah.
and he would totally agree with you, 400%.
Cool.
Is that
I know them.
yeah, you mesh those two together, and he was just
Yeah.
down there with Malo and playing on the. He has a Latin band, and there's other, and there is that. Well, I guess it's just the clave,
Yeah.
with electronic instrumentation or something to that effect.
Yeah. There's a lot of similarities maybe in the fundamentals. I don't know. Not necessary rudiments, but just for some reason it blends. It blends kind of like if you play, a C chord against an A minor, you get this, you got two different.
We don't want to get too deep into theory here on the Jay Feinberg show. Let me ask you a question, Mr. Errico. Were you witness to? How did you meet Michael Shreve?
Through Santana.
So at Woodstock, the drum solo that he
Yeah.
took, were you there? I mean, I know you were
No.
there, but you weren't. Were you off?
No, I wasn't there for the performance. However, we all flew down to LA together to the screening. And I remember,
Oh man, who's we?
well, I went with all the guys from Santana.
Wow.
And for some reason, and I don't remember why, Vincent Price, the actor, the horror movie actor, was on the plane with us.
He jumped on the plane with you.
I don't remember why. I don't know what did he have to do. I forgot why, but we were all on a plane, and there's an interesting story. This was one of those plane flights that had an incident. Just before we landed in LA, this was in the early days of the 747, the jumbo jet. Well, I think it was PSA that doesn't even exist here.
Right.
It's the Southwest of back then.
Right, but a Pacific
PSA.
Airline.
Yeah. Must have turned in to the approaching flight path of the 747. It was in front, and we got jet blast from the wash.
Wow.
And it threw our plane out of the sky. Literally, it was like a giant grabbed the plane and just went like this with it. And I remember Carabello running into the bathroom, and when he came out, he was like he was white. It was like, it was scary. We hit the ceiling, we went all in.